Okay, you know the game Would You Rather? No, you don't. You think you do, but before we jump into this message, I want to introduce you to the best possible version of that game. See, usually when you play the game, it's just one person proposing a pair of scenarios, and the people present vote on which they'd rather do. And that's great, really, it's great. But what you should try next time you play that game is having that one person propose the scenarios, and then the other game participants ask lots and lots of questions, clarifying follow-up questions that the one person has to definitively answer as if they are the all-knowing being of that universe. If that one person has an insane sense of humor like I do, each would you rather scenario is going to get really weird and absurd and complex really fast, and it ends up being a whole lot richer and deeper and more hilarious than the original version of that game. If you're watching this and you and I ever get the chance to meet, please, let's play Would You Rather. It's like my favorite game. For some of you, games like Would You Rather are really fun. You love the absurdity of it, you love the mystery of it, you love putting fake pressure on yourself to make the right choice. Others of you probably hate games like that. You find them to be a waste of time. While everybody else gets lost in the details of each scenario, your innermost being cries out within you, "Who cares?" For some, the reality that there is no right choice is what makes the game fun, but for others, it's what makes the game dreadful. We've probably felt some version of that tension in our everyday choices, haven't we? Sometimes in life, you know there's a right choice and a wrong choice. You might not know what the right choice is, but you know that there is one. But there are other choices in life that most definitely aren't so simple. They seem as arbitrary as a round of Would You Rather. You can make a pretty strong case for either side. You could either spend your Saturday voluntarily cleaning out your mom's car, or you could spend it going to a friend's house. Which one is the right choice? You can make a pretty strong case for either option. It feels more like a Would You Rather scenario than a right or a wrong. You could either take your elective class with all your friends, or you could take one that you're really interested in for your future career. Which one's the right choice? You could make a pretty strong case for either option. It feels more like a Would You Rather than a right or a wrong. You could either ask your crush out or not ask your crush out. Which one is the right choice? You can make a pretty strong case for either option. It feels more like a Would You Rather than a right or a wrong. I don't know. Maybe you're content, like navigating these kinds of choices just however you want. Maybe that works for you, and you don't really feel like you need the gospel to influence your life at that deep a level. I just want you to know that it can, and that if you let it, it has the potential to make even those kinds of decisions absolutely life-changing. Being the founding father of what would become the nation of Israel, Abraham, called Abram in his early years, had to make a lot of choices. We often show him a lot of honor and reverence because he's one of the hero figures of our faith. But the truth is, Abram's choices weren't always clean-cut and easy. In fact, at the very onset of God's promise to make Abram the father of a great nation, he was faced with a choice that left him with his own difficult version of Would You Rather to play. And while it might seem easy for us in the 21st century to scoff at the way Abram handled this moment we read about in Genesis 16, I think if we dig deeper, we'll discover something genuinely helpful for you and me when we navigate everyday decisions of our own. We're in Genesis 16, starting in verse 1. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had not been able to bear children for him. And this was a big deal culturally in that time period. Love it or hate it, at the time, there was a lot of pride and shame for women around whether or not they could get pregnant and give their husbands sons. It had to do with passing on the family name and securing the father's legacy. But in this case, Sarai's inability to get pregnant was an even bigger deal because in the chapter prior to this, God had given Abram that promise about making him into a great nation. Yeah, guess how difficult it is to have your descendants become a great nation when you don't have any descendants. It's quite difficult. So when we consider the factors at play here, it helps us understand why Sarai got so desperate that she did what she did next. But she had an Egyptian servant named Hagar. So Sarai said to Abram, "The Lord has prevented me from having children. Go and sleep with my servant. Perhaps I can have children through her." Okay, I get it. There are a lot of cultural factors at play here that do not fly well in our modern culture. Sarai would be canceled for any number of reasons just for suggesting this in our culture. But back then, this was acceptable practice. It was a way families had children when the wives were unable to get pregnant. And while we're pretty repulsed by it today, this proposal would have made some sense to Abram, at least on the surface. I mean, consider the mental math that Abram would have done in this moment. God had promised him that he would have children, but his wife can't get pregnant. His wife's servant can, and his wife's servant's kid would still be his kid. So if you're Abram living in this day and culture, you're thinking that this might have been what God had in mind all along. You could make a case that this way leads to the end of his wife's shame. You could make a case that God's plans aren't always the most obvious and straightforward. You could make a case that Hagar might even be better taken care of in his household if she was the mother of his son. You can make plenty of cases for the other side too, of course, but I'm just saying that you can see how this seemed like a would you rather scenario for Abram. Back to verse 2. And Abram agreed with Sarai's proposal. So Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar the Egyptian servant and gave her to Abram as a wife. This happened 10 years after Abram had settled in the land of Canaan. And if you continued reading, you'd discover that Hagar's son Ishmael was not the beginning of the great nation that God had in mind. God, as it turned out, planned to begin the nation of Israel specifically through Sarai, and that's eventually how it played out. But this decision-making moment of Abram's was important in his development as a man of God. It exposed something in his heart that he may not have even realized was there until this split decision presented itself. See, this moment exposed that Abram felt he had to earn it. He knew God was present and he might have professed that God was faithful, but at a heart level, what felt most true to Abram at this point in his life was that he had to earn God's gift of a child. He had to take it into his own hands. And having that exposed before himself and his family and his God set the tone for the rest of Abraham's weird, wild life of following God and making decisions. What feels most true to you when you're making split decisions? Maybe it is that you have to earn it. Maybe God's grace seems too good to be true, so your performance mentality is the lens through which you see split decisions and you naturally lean toward trying to earn it. Maybe what feels most true to you is that everyone has to like you. You gain your sense of security from other people's opinion of you, and so your people-pleasing nature is the lens through which you make split decisions. You naturally lean toward making others happy. Maybe what feels most true to you is that you're broken. You've decided you're beyond fixing, and so your self-hatred is the lens through which you make split decisions. You naturally lean toward punishing yourself. God has known from the beginning that these imperfections would be present in you, just like he knew Abram's would be present in him. He knew that before he made you, and he knew that before he saved you. But maybe, just maybe, those unhealthy lenses in you can't be redeemed and transformed until they're first exposed. Maybe the tough decisions you're making are ultimately about exposing these unhealthy thought patterns and beliefs to you so the Holy Spirit can begin the work of digging out the lies and replacing them with the truth. So, maybe the choice between cleaning your mom's car or going to your friend's house isn't really about what you actually choose. Maybe it's actually about exposing in you your gut feeling that you have to earn your mom's love by doing things for her. Maybe exposing that is what God's really after. Maybe the choice between taking an elective class with all your friends or taking the one that you're interested in for your career isn't really about what you actually choose. Maybe it's actually about exposing in you your tendency to put everybody else before yourself and act as if your voice doesn't matter. Maybe exposing that is what God's really after. Maybe the choice between asking your crush out or not asking your crush out isn't really about what you actually choose. Maybe it's actually about exposing in you your perception of yourself as somebody unworthy of love and affection. Maybe exposing that is what God is really after. We have these decisions that we make in life and we're not sure there's really a right answer to them, and maybe there isn't. But maybe what we choose isn't really the point. Maybe God's after something much better through the process of our decision making. Here's the point. Expose in your heart what God's known from the start. That's what you can do as someone who sees through the lens of the gospel. Even in the small moments, even in the little decisions, even in the things that feel more like would you rather than right or wrong, our God is close and our God is personal, and his hope is to use every moment in our lives as an opportunity to further our transformation. So don't miss it. Don't glaze over it. Take time to consider why you naturally lean toward the decisions you lean toward, and allow the gospel to expose things in your heart that need redemption and transformation whenever you're faced with the split.